You don't belong here anymore, Dad. Just sit quietly in the back where no one notices you. Those words weren't spoken by a stranger. They came from my own son, Daniel, whispered sharp as a knife into my ear on the day of my wife's funeral. I nearly buckled right there in the front pew of St. Mark's Lutheran Church in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. The air was thick with the perfume of lilies, sunlight streaming in through stained glass windows that painted the polished oak floors in colors too beautiful for such a bitter day. I was burying my Margaret, my wife of 43 years, the woman I'd built a home with, raised 2 children with, worked overtime shifts for at the John Deere plant to provide for, and yet my son, my flesh and blood, was telling me to hide, to fade into the background, while he and his sister strutted at the altar as if they were the rightful heirs to Margaret's legacy. I swallowed the sting, throat burning as the choir's hymn rang hollow in my ears. Neighbors and old friends whispered condolences, but in my own family pew, I felt like a stranger. Daniel took the podium first, standing tall and proud, his voice booming. Mom always said Sarah and I would carry her legacy forward, and now it's up to us to honor that. Us, not Dad. Just them. When Sarah rose, her words cut deeper. Mom trusted us to take care of things when she was gone. She knew Dad. Well, he means well, but sometimes he just can't handle everything. The congregation chuckled softly, as if she'd made some harmless joke, but I knew better. That wasn't humor. That was humiliation. I lowered my head, my hands clenched tight. The gold band Margaret had slipped on my finger back in 1979, digging into my skin. But deep inside, something else stirred. Not just grief, not just shame, something steadier, sharper, because I knew what Margaret had left behind. I knew her will. I knew the trust we had built together. And I knew that despite their smug performance in that church, Daniel and Sarah were walking blind into a storm they couldn't control. Before I continue, if you're new here, please like, comment, and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. That night, I sat alone in the house Margaret and I had worked a lifetime to keep. The silence pressed against me like a weight. Her laugh was gone, her touch gone, her warmth gone. And in its place, only the memory of my children's smirks at her funeral. I wasn't angry yet. Not fully, but I could feel it building, slow and steady. They weren't just grieving. They were circling me, testing the ground. And when I opened Margaret's cedar chest that evening, her files still neatly organized, her letters, her final will, the trust deed we'd signed together, my suspicions hardened into certainty. They thought I was weak. They thought I would sit quietly in the back while they took center stage. But they were wrong. 3 days after the funeral, Daniel walked through my front door without knocking. Sarah at his heels. He carried himself like he already owned the place. "Dad," he said, in that voice of false sympathy that made my stomach turn, "we need to talk about Mom's affairs." I stayed seated at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of cold coffee. "What about them?" Sarah leaned against the counter, scrolling on her phone like she was already bored with me. "The house, the accounts, everything. We just want to make sure it's all handled properly." Handled properly. I set the mug down, steady as stone. "Your mother and I handled everything before she passed. It's all written down, clear as day," Daniel smirked, tugging at his sleeve. "Come on, Dad. You're not the best with money. Remember when you almost lost the house back in Woodbine? Mom told us not to let you get in over your head again." The words stung, but I stayed calm. Sarah's voice joined his, sharp and sure. "Mom trusted us. She wanted us to make sure you're comfortable. That means we'll handle the assets. Especially the house." My jaw tightened. "The house?" "Yeah," Daniel said, casual as if it were a done deal. It's too much for you. You're alone now. Big house, too many memories. It makes sense for us to sell it, split it, and you can move somewhere smaller. Easier for you. Smaller. Easier. What he really meant was, get out. Hand it over. I looked at my children, and I saw the truth I had been avoiding. They weren't mourning their mother. They were vultures circling her grave. And in that moment, I realized they had no idea what they were about to walk into. Daniel pulled out a chair at the kitchen table like it was his own, stretching back with that cocky grin he'd worn since he was a teenager. Sarah perched on the counter, crossing her arms, her phone finally shoved into her pocket. "Dad," Daniel started, his voice slow and deliberate. "This isn't about us trying to take anything from you. It's about protecting you. Mom always said you weren't good with paperwork. You know, mortgages, insurance, taxes. We're just trying to help." I looked down at my calloused hands, the same hands that had put food on their table for decades. Those hands had worked assembly lines, had come home black with grease, had held Margaret's when she was sick. And now, my own children were looking at me as though I were some old fool in need of babysitting. Sarah chimed in, her tone sharper. "We already talked to Aunt Linda. She said Mom confided in her. She didn't want you overwhelmed. She wanted us to take charge. It felt like a script they'd rehearsed. Aunt Linda's name was just a prop, a way to box me in." I forced my voice to stay calm. "Your mother trusted me, Sarah. She trusted us together. We made decisions as husband and wife. Not you. Not Aunt Linda." Daniel leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Dad, you're not listening. Things are different now. You're alone. You can't handle all this by yourself. We're not asking. We're telling you. It's better if we take over." His words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I stared at him. "And what if I say no?" Daniel smiled, slow and cold. "Then we'll make it legal." Sarah nodded, backing him up. "We'll go through probate if we have to. Everyone knows Mom didn't want you struggling. The court would side with us." My chest tightened. For years, I'd sacrificed everything for those two. Overtime shifts, missed vacations, nights where Margaret had to eat dinner alone because I was still at the plant. And now, they wanted to drag me into court, to rip apart the very home I'd built brick by brick. I rose from my chair, my voice steady. "Your mother and I put things in writing. You'll see soon enough." They exchanged a look, half amusement, half disbelief. Daniel smirked. "Dad, you really think Mom left everything to you? You? That's cute," Sarah added, her voice dripping with pity. "We're just trying to save you from yourself. Don't make this harder." With that, they left, the door slamming behind them like a final insult. For the first time in years, I sat in silence, listening to the clock tick on the wall. Each second sounded like a countdown. I pulled Margaret's cedar chest closer, my hands trembling as I opened it again. The scent of her lavender sachets hit me, bringing tears to my eyes. Inside were the documents we'd signed years ago with Henderson and Myers law firm downtown. Her will, the trust, the deed. Margaret had been meticulous. She knew her children's flaws. She knew greed could grow like weeds if left unchecked. The house, the accounts, the retirement fund, she had protected them. But Daniel and Sarah didn't know that yet. And something in me shifted that night. For weeks, I had walked through life like a man hollowed out by grief. But now I felt a spark, a resolve. They thought I was weak. They thought I'd surrender. But they had underestimated me. The next morning, I called Margaret's old attorney, Mr. Patterson, a gray-haired man who had known us for years. When I told him what Daniel and Sarah had said, he let out a long sigh. "I warned Margaret this might happen," he said. "That's why she made the trust ironclad. They don't stand a chance if it goes to court." Hearing that steadied me, but Patterson wasn't done. His voice lowered. "But be careful. If they're desperate, they might try something reckless." And he was right. 2 weeks later, an envelope slid through my mail slot. Thick, official, the kind that carried the weight of war. Inside was a petition. Daniel and Sarah had already filed for control of the estate. They were really doing it. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the papers, my chest pounding. The words blurred together. Incompetence. Incapable of managing assets. Petition for guardianship. My own children had labeled me unfit. For a moment, shame threatened to crush me. But then I thought of Margaret. I thought of her trust in me, the nights she'd whispered, "Don't let them push you around, Frank." I folded the papers carefully, placed them back in the envelope, and whispered into the empty kitchen, "You picked the wrong man to corner." Because this wasn't just about money. This was about dignity, about a lifetime of sweat and sacrifice. They thought they could erase with a stamp from the courthouse. They had no idea that the very documents they feared most were about to turn everything against them. The day of the first hearing arrived like a storm cloud. Cedar Rapids Courthouse loomed ahead, its limestone steps worn smooth from decades of footsteps. I stood at the base, gripping my leather briefcase, Margaret's trust documents tucked safely inside, like a weapon. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and disinfectant. The echo of shoes on marble carried down the long hallways. I paused in front of the courtroom doors, my reflection staring back at me in the polished brass handles. An old man, yes, but not a broken one. When I stepped inside, Daniel and Sarah were already there with their attorney. He was young, slick-haired, barely 30, the kind who probably thought he could steamroll a grieving father with some legal jargon. Daniel leaned back in his chair, arms folded, smirking at me like he'd already won. Sarah avoided my eyes, scrolling on her phone until the clerk scolded her. The judge, Patricia Henley, was a stern woman with silver hair pulled tight in a bun. She adjusted her glasses and glanced between us. "This is a petition for guardianship filed by Daniel and Sarah Davis against their father, Franklin Davis." Hearing my name like that, against their father, cut deeper than anything else. Their lawyer stood. "Your Honor, this is a simple matter. My clients are only concerned for their father's well-being. Mr. Davis has shown increasing signs of confusion, neglect of his property, and financial irresponsibility. They merely wish to ensure his affairs are handled properly." He spoke smoothly, as though rehearsed. Daniel nodded solemnly, as if he were some dutiful son carrying a heavy burden. I gripped the edge of the table, my pulse pounding in my ears. "That's not true," I said, my voice steady. "I've managed my home and my finances without issue. I paid off my mortgage after 30 years at John Deere. I cared for my wife until the day she passed. I pay every bill on time. I'm not incompetent." Sarah spoke up, her voice syrupy sweet, but there was steel beneath it. "Dad, this isn't about attacking you. It's about protecting you. You forget things. You let the house fall apart. Mom wouldn't want you living like this." The congregation at Margaret's funeral had chuckled when Sarah painted me as forgetful, as if I were some bumbling fool. Now she was doing it under oath. The judge frowned. "Do you have evidence of neglect or financial mismanagement?" Their lawyer shuffled papers. "We'll be presenting bank statements, photographs of disrepair, and testimony from relatives who expressed concern." Relatives. I didn't have to guess who. Aunt Linda had always had a sharp tongue and a soft spot for drama. But I wasn't unarmed. When the judge called for a recess, I stepped outside into the hallway, my breath fogging against the cold window glass. "Mr. Patterson." My attorney placed a hand on my shoulder. "Remember what I told you, Frank. The trust is airtight. They don't have a leg to stand on." I nodded. But deep down, I wasn't just thinking about winning in court. I wanted the truth exposed. I wanted Daniel and Sarah's greed laid bare for everyone to see. When we returned, Patterson rose. He wasn't flashy. He didn't need to be. He simply opened Margaret's trust, placed it before the judge, and let the words speak. "Your Honor, This trust was established years ago by Franklin and Margaret Davis. It clearly outlines that the family home and all assets remain under Franklin's control until his passing, at which point they transfer directly into a managed account for the grandchildren, not Daniel or Sarah. Mrs. Davis anticipated the possibility of disputes, and she wrote this specifically to protect her husband's wishes and her legacy. The color drained from Sarah's face. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his smirk fading for the first time. The judge leaned forward, skimming the papers. "So you're telling me Mrs. Davis excluded her adult children from direct control of the estate?" Patterson nodded. "That's correct. She trusted her husband, not them." Daniel's face reddened. "That's not fair. Mom wouldn't do that. He's twisting it." Sarah slammed her hand on the table. "Dad, why didn't you tell us about this? Why keep it a secret?" I met her eyes, my voice calm. "Because I knew this day would come. Your mother knew too." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. The judge cleared her throat. "We'll reconvene tomorrow. I want to review these documents thoroughly." Court was adjourned, but the war was just beginning. As I walked out into the cool Iowa evening, Daniel called after me. His voice wasn't calm now. It was sharp, venomous. "You think this is over, old man?" "We're not done. We'll find another way." I didn't turn around. I didn't need to, because for the first time since Margaret's funeral, I felt a strange peace. They'd underestimated me, and soon everyone in Cedar Rapids would know the truth about my children. The next morning, the courthouse lobby was buzzing like a hive. News had traveled fast. Cedar Rapids was a small enough town that anything juicy spread from diner counters to church pews in hours. I could feel the eyes on me as I walked through the lobby. Old friends from the neighborhood, men I'd worked beside at John Deere, even the pastor from St. Paul's. They were there, murmuring, shaking their heads. They'd heard the whispers. Daniel and Sarah trying to strip their father of his home. It wasn't just gossip now. It was shame. Inside the courtroom, Daniel looked rattled, his tie loosened, his eyes bloodshot like he hadn't slept. Sarah was stiff, lips pressed tight, her composure cracking. Their lawyer looked less confident, too, like a kid caught cheating on a test. Judge Henley entered, the room snapping to order. "We reconvene on the petition for guardianship of Franklin Davis." Patterson rose first. "Your Honor, before proceeding, I'd like to submit testimony from community members who've known Mr. Davis for decades." The judge nodded. "Proceed." One by one, familiar faces stepped forward. Mrs. Klein, our old neighbor, spoke in her frail voice. "Frank mowed my lawn every summer until my grandson took over. He's the one who helped me refinance after Harold died. That man's sharper with numbers than anyone I know." Then Pastor Miller, "Frank was Margaret's caretaker until her final breath. He organized church finances for years without error. If he's incompetent, then I'm blind." The words carried weight, not legal weight alone, but moral weight. The courtroom began to shift, sympathy sliding away from Daniel and Sarah like sand through fingers. Daniel exploded. He slammed his hand on the table, his voice echoing. "They don't know what they're talking about. He's old, he forgets things, he doesn't belong in that house anymore." The judge's gavel cracked. "Mr. Davis, you will maintain order." But Daniel wasn't finished. He turned toward the crowd, his face red, sweat shining on his forehead. "You all think he's some saint? He's not. He's just a stubborn old man, clinging to something that doesn't belong to him anymore." Those words hung heavy in the air. Not doesn't belong to him anymore. The entire room caught the slip. It wasn't about protecting me. It was about taking. Sarah's voice broke in, desperate. "Stop, Daniel! Just stop!" But it was too late. The judge adjusted her glasses, her eyes narrowing like twin blades. "I've seen enough. This petition is not about guardianship. It is about greed." She turned to me. "Mr. Davis, You remain the sole legal owner of your home and estate. This court will not strip you of your independence." Gasps filled the courtroom. Someone even clapped before the bailiff barked for silence. Daniel's face collapsed, the fight draining out of him. Sarah sank back, tears in her eyes, not from guilt, but from humiliation. But Patterson wasn't done. He leaned in, whispering to me, "Do you want the last nail in the coffin?" I nodded. He cleared his throat. "Your Honor, I would also like to enter into the record a bank transfer statement. Daniel Davis withdrew $25,000 from a joint account with his father 2 weeks after Margaret's passing, without authorization. We have documentation proving intent to conceal." The room went silent. Daniel's head snapped toward me, his jaw dropping. How did you—" But it was Patterson who answered. "You shouldn't leave a paper trail if you plan to rob your own father." The judge's voice was like stone. "Mr. Davis, you will return those funds immediately. And if I hear of further attempts to exploit your father, I'll see you in criminal court." Daniel's body slumped into his chair, broken. Sarah sat frozen, her hands trembling, unable to look at anyone. I sat there quietly, my chest rising and falling. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. I just let the silence do the work, because everyone in that room knew the truth now. When the gavel fell, the sound echoed like thunder. Outside, as I walked down the courthouse steps, people stopped me. Some clapped me on the back. Some just nodded with quiet respect. I'd walked in as the man accused of incompetence. I walked out as the man who had exposed his children's greed. But the story wasn't over. Because what Daniel shouted in that courtroom, that I didn't belong in my own home, still burned in my chest, and I wasn't about to let them walk back into my life as if nothing had happened. I wish I could say that after the courthouse. Daniel and Sarah left me alone. But greed doesn't die in a single blow. It lingers, like a bad smell. A week later, I was sitting on my porch with a cup of black coffee when I saw Daniel's truck roll past my street. He didn't stop, just slowed enough to let me know he was watching. Sarah had called once too, her voice soft, pleading. "Dad, maybe we should talk. Maybe we can work this out." But I wasn't blind anymore. I'd seen what working it out meant to them. Me losing everything so they could gain. I hung up the phone and never picked it back up. Instead, I walked down to Patterson's office. The autumn wind carried the smell of burning leaves, the small-town air filled with church bells and train horns from the old depot. Life kept moving, and I wasn't about to stay stuck in betrayal. "Frank," Patterson said, sliding a set of papers across his desk, "if you want peace, it's time we make it airtight." "What's that?" I asked. "An updated will and a trust. Everything locked. They can't touch a dime without your say-so, and if they ever try again, it won't just be civil. It'll be criminal." I read the papers slowly, each line like another brick in a wall between me and my children's greed. Signing my name wasn't easy. It meant admitting that Daniel and Sarah weren't the people Margaret and I had raised. But it also meant freedom. When the ink dried, Patterson looked me in the eye. "You're safe now." Safe. That word hadn't felt true for months. The real poetic justice came on Sunday. I walked into St. Paul's Lutheran Church, the same sanctuary where Margaret's funeral had been held, the same pew where Daniel had whispered, "I didn't belong." My heart pounded as I stepped inside, the smell of lilies and old hymnals wrapping around me. The congregation turned. People smiled, nodding. Some even clapped me on the back as I walked to my seat. I wasn't an outcast anymore. I was respected. Daniel and Sarah were there too, sitting stiff in the back row. The whispers around them weren't kind now. They were sharp, judgmental, slicing through the silence. Those are the ones who tried to take his house. Can you believe children would do that? Poor Frank. Thank God the court set things straight. I didn't look back at them. I didn't need to. The shame hung on their shoulders heavier than any words I could speak. After service, as people gathered for coffee and donuts in the church hall, Sarah tried to approach me. Her eyes glistened, her lips trembling. "Dad, please," she started. But before she could finish, Mrs. Klein, frail as she was, stepped between us. "Leave him be. Haven't you done enough?" Sarah froze. Daniel tugged her arm, muttering, "Let's go." They slipped out, heads bowed. That was the last time they ever tried to face me in public. As for me, I rebuilt. Slowly, quietly. I planted fresh flowers in Margaret's garden, just the way she liked them. Marigolds near the steps, roses by the porch. I reopened her old recipe box and started cooking Sunday dinners again. Even if it was just for me, the house felt alive once more. Not haunted by betrayal, but filled with memory and peace. I didn't win back my children. I may never, but I won something deeper. My dignity, my independence, my right to live the life I built with my own 2 hands. And sometimes, when the sun sets just right over the Iowa fields, I swear I can feel Margaret beside me, her hand resting lightly on mine. Proud. Proud that I fought back. Proud that I didn't let greed destroy me. Proud that justice, in the end, found its way. So here's my advice. If you've listened this far, never let anyone, family or not, convince you that you don't belong in the home you built, in the life you earned. Because dignity is something no one can steal unless you hand it over. Tell us your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories.